The sun had no mercy that summer, and it pressed down on the dry ranch land like a judgment, cracking the earth into long, pale scars that looked like they might bleed if you touched them. And Elias Calder felt every one of those cracks in his bones as he walked the fence line with a half-empty canteen swinging from his hand, knowing that by nightfall even that would be gone. He was poor in the way only a man who owned land but not luck could be. Poor, rich in dust, sky, and responsibility, and bankrupt in cattle, rain, and friends. The war between settlers and the Apache had been burning for years by then, a fire fed by fear, betrayal, and blood, and Elias had lost more than most. A brother buried under a cairn of stones, a burned barn, and neighbors who no longer spoke his name because survival had turned them hard and suspicious. On that day when the heat shimmered so fiercely it made the horizon tremble, he saw them, figures moving slowly along the ridge, not riding but walking, heads low, weapons slung but not raised. Apache. The word itself tightened, his chest like a fist. Every story he'd ever heard told him to run, to hide, to shoot first if he could, but the sight before him didn't look like an attack. It looked like exhaustion. Men, women, even a child stumbling as they crossed his land toward the only well for miles, the same well his father had dug with bleeding hands years before. Elias felt the old lessons fight inside him. They are your enemies. They will kill you. They will take what little you have left. But louder still was another truth, one that didn't care about flags or skin or language, the truth of thirst. He remembered the day his brother died not from a bullet, but from dehydration while hiding in the rocks after an ambush, lips cracked, eyes glassy, whispering for water that never came. When the Apache group reached the edge of the corral and stopped, their leader stepped forward slowly, palms open, eyes sharp but hollow with need. No words were spoken at first. Only the wind moved, lifting dust between them. Elias looked at his well, then at his canteen, then at the people before him who were supposed to be monsters and instead looked painfully human. The choice felt impossible because it was simple. He walked to the well, heart pounding so loud he was sure they could hear it, and lowered the bucket. Each creak of the rope felt like a countdown to death. When the bucket came up full and shining, he drank none of it. He carried it forward and set it down between them, then stepped back. The Apache leader studied him, suspicion warring with disbelief, before kneeling and dipping his hands into the water, lifting it to his mouth like something sacred. Others followed, drinking carefully, gratefully, as if afraid the moment might vanish. No one drew a weapon. No one spoke. And in that silence, something old and terrible loosened its grip just a little. If this moment surprised you, if you feel that pull of tension in humanity, remember that stories like this live and die by those who listen. So stay with us and consider subscribing, because what happens next is where the war itself begins to change. When the Apache finished drinking, they did not rush or retreat. Instead, they waited, and that waiting unnerved Elias more than any charge could have, because it meant intention, and intention meant the moment mattered to them as much as it did to him. The leader finally spoke, his voice rough but measured, thanking Elias not as an enemy but as a man, offering his name in return, a name Elias struggled to pronounce but never forgot. He learned then that they had been driven from a river they'd used for generations, poisoned upstream by mining runoff, their children sick, their elders weak, and the well on Elias's land was the only water left within days' travel. The war, Elias realized, was not a single thing but 1,000 small thefts and fears piled on top of one another until violence felt inevitable. Still, kindness alone did not erase danger. Word traveled fast in that country, and when a neighboring rancher rode up later that evening and saw Apache tracks near the well, his face twisted with fury. He called Elias a traitor, accused him of inviting death onto them all, and swore to report him to the militia. That night, Elias slept with his rifle close, knowing he had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But dawn brought something unexpected. The Apache returned, not to take but to give. They brought back the bucket Elias had lent, repaired the broken fence along the east pasture, and left a bundle of dried meat and herbs by the well. Over the following weeks, an uneasy pattern formed. The Apache came only at dawn, only in small numbers, never armed, and always left something behind: labor, knowledge of weather signs, warnings of raids by other bands who cared nothing for peace. Slowly, rumors spread that Calder Ranch was untouched. Protected not by guns but by an understanding no one could quite explain. The militia did come eventually, demanding answers, threatening arrest, but they found no weapons caches, no hidden camps, only a tired rancher and a well that served anyone dying of thirst. What stopped them was not law or mercy but results. Attacks in the area dropped, stolen cattle were quietly returned, and a fragile calm settled where blood had once soaked the ground. Elias learned the cost of this peace too. Some settlers shunned him. Some Apaches distrusted him. Standing between worlds meant belonging fully to neither. But it also meant seeing the lie at the heart of endless war, that cruelty was strength and compassion weakness. One night, sitting by the well under a sky thick with stars, Elias and the Apache leader spoke of fathers, of land, of children who deserved more than inherited hatred. The war did not end that day, not everywhere, but it changed shape right there, shrinking from something inevitable into something questioned. If you're feeling that tension between fear and hope, if you're realizing how one choice can bend history, stay with this story and subscribe to the channel, because the final chapter shows how a single act of mercy echoed far beyond one poor ranch. Years later, when Elias was old, and the lines on his face were as deep as the cracks that once split his land, people would ask how the war really began to end in that region, and the official answers never mentioned a well or a bucket of water, but the people who lived there knew better. The fragile truce that formed around Calder Ranch became a model whispered about in nearby territories. Proof that coexistence was not fantasy but labor, patience, and risk. The Apache leader kept his word, restraining young warriors eager for revenge, just as Elias stood between angry settlers and their rifles, arguing not with ideology but with evidence. Fewer graves, safer roads, children growing up without learning the sound of gunfire as lullaby. When drought returned worse than before, it was the Apache who guided settlers to hidden springs. And when disease swept through the camps, Elias opened his home, using remedies he'd learned from the very people he was once taught to hate. Not every story ended well. There were betrayals, losses, moments when the old rage flared and threatened to consume everything. But the difference now was memory. People remembered that once in the worst heat, mercy had worked. The well became a meeting place, then a symbol, and finally a promise that water would never again be denied to anyone dying of thirst. When Elias passed, buried on a hill overlooking the land he never abandoned, Apaches and settlers stood together in silence, lowering him into the ground with the same care. No speeches were needed. The war did not end because one man was perfect or brave beyond fear. It changed because he chose to see enemies as humans when it cost him something to do so. That lesson outlived treaties and borders, carried forward in quiet. Decisions made by people who heard the story and dared to act differently. And now you've heard it too. If stories like this, stories where humanity bends history, move you, then don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, stay with us, and help keep these stories alive, because the next one might change the way you see the world just as profoundly.